Welcome to the Real Talk with Megan podcast, where we have candid conversations about the things that matter most. I'm your host, Megan, and we're going to deep dive into the topic of mental health. Together, we'll work to destigmatize mental health and start conversations. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and get ready for a real and raw conversation about mental health on the Real Talk with Megan podcast. Welcome back. We're here again with Joni. Thanks for being here again.
Absolutely. It's good to be back.
I love it whenever we have these conversations. Although this one, I don't know if I love this conversation because we're going to talk about inner critic. And if you're listening to this and you felt like kind of cringy or laughed or any kind of response, you probably know what we're talking about. I think it's something that we all struggle with, thoughts. And even if you don't realize it, I think it's still there. So, yeah, we're going to talk through some of that today. Years ago, I did a survey for my blog, which now is this podcast. And I was in 2021 and I talked about three questions is what negative or false belief do you tell yourself every day, which plays heavily into that inner critic? How do those negative thoughts affect your daily life? That's that second question. And then what has played a factor in your inner critic? And that was one that people were like, I've never thought about that before. I've never thought about what factors play into that. But I think maybe it was eye opening for them and it was anonymous. So, like, I don't know who filled this out, but I had like 23 people fill this out. And I remember sitting in my office just crying because I'm like, part of them, I'm like, I've been there. I know how you feel and my heart just broke for them. Two things that I learned from it when I was reading through all of them is that there are really two sides to it. You can have both of them, but there was one that was more present than the other. So one was inward, so facing inward of how we perceive ourselves, that dealt with our worth, capacity, those kind of things. And the other one was outward, how we believe that others perceive us. So it's dealing with everyone else, even specific relationships. And I could see the difference between when people were answering those questions. So is that something you see when you talk to a lot of people or just in daily interactions if people are struggling with that inner critic?
I think what's interesting is that when we're really talking about the inner critic, they don't recognize it as an inner critic. They
Hmm.
just recognize it as this is just the truth.
Yeah.
And it's believed, like
Hmm.
it's hardcore believed. And to try to think of something else other than that
Yeah.
is very uncomfortable, like a lot of resistance. So
Hmm.
when you're trying to work with somebody and just kind of present the idea
Yeah.
that maybe maybe there's no facts behind this, but this thought that you have about yourself, or ask them like, how do you know that to be true, or when did you learn that, or
Right.
when do you remember to begin thinking that about
Mhm.
yourself? It usually takes a while to peel back those layers and try to figure out, like, when did I start thinking that?
Yeah.
Most people can't, like, they can't just go back and
Hmm.
pinpoint that moment. It is interesting how real
Hmm.
and very, very believed it
Yeah.
actually is.
Yeah, no, I think for a lot of people, and especially women, the other day I was even talking to somebody and how many factors we just have that fight against us, whether it's body image and this inner critic plays into that. And that's something I dealt with growing up. And so I think a lot of women and people in general have this belief from a young age
Mhm.
that is filtering through and you don't realize that something back here, even if you had the best parents in the world and you had all these great things, you're like, well, I don't have any complaints. So it couldn't be that. Two things can be true at once, right? That you can have this amazing childhood,
Mhm.
but also this belief that
Mhm.
is like deep within you is still there. And so I remember in 5th grade is when I got glasses and they
Mm.
were not pretty
Mhm.
glasses. I mean, I picked them out, so I can't blame anyone else. Like I picked them. But like I had horrible vision and so I had these wired frames and that was one of those things that my inner critic was like, these are ugly. Like, but this is my only option. And then to add like insult to injury, having someone else that's not trying to be mean about it, one of the people that help you get the glasses, they're like, "Oh, these lenses are going to be really thick." And I was like,
Mm.
"Well, crap." Like
Mhm.
now I already felt bad and now I feel worse. And so it just played into that. But
Mhm.
I'm like, I can vividly remember those moments. And I know that that played into how I felt about myself, even to this day sometimes. I've got a little bit more handle on it, been able to manage a little more with some counseling and talking to people, but it's not all good days. There's good and bad, but finding ways to manage that is super important. But it's crazy how your childhood and different little things, even like unintentional things,
Mhm,
whether it's something you did or said or
mhm.
someone said to you, lingers and stays there.
Yes.
Do you feel like you've like seen that like even in your own life or through a lot of other people?
Yeah, we're gathering data early on where we start forming beliefs about ourselves based on other people's reactions,
Mm-hmm.
other people's words. We watched other people,
Yep.
like people we might have looked up to, and we paid attention to maybe how they behaved
Mm-hmm.
or how they handled something somebody said to them. And we gathered all this data and we formed a belief, and then we held on to it real tight.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that now that we are aware of and influenced by other people's
Yeah.
experiences,
Mm-hmm.
their beliefs about themselves,
Yep.
now more than ever, like people from across the globe, now we know what Susie over in England feels about
Right.
herself now. We're, again, still taking in data and forming conclusions
Yeah.
based on all that data. And you're right, like we brought in information, as we say, from knee high to a duck, right? We started gathering that information unfiltered, like wide open. You're a
Mm-hmm.
5-year-old little kid,
Yep.
you're just fresh and new and wide open, and everything's just going in and you're accepting it hook, line,
Mm-hmm.
and sinker. And yes, so that's how we took all of this and we ended up with these beliefs. And so very interesting is we don't even know all the beliefs that we
Yeah.
have. And not until you start identifying behaviors,
Mm.
different choices,
Mm-hmm.
things that you're saying with help, somebody can help you peel back. And
Mm-hmm.
then you go back and you uncover this belief, and sometimes it's really really embarrassing
Yeah.
that you're like, oh, like I have that belief about myself. But again, try to convince somebody to not, right, have it.
Yeah.
Try to convince somebody to let go of it. Mm-mm. They're like
Mm-hmm.
white knuckle gripped
Yeah.
to that thing, even though it's harmful.
Yeah, and well, sometimes when that's the only thing you know, it's like, well, this is normal, right? We all
Mhm.
we all are supposed to feel this way and think this way, and it's kind of like if you grew up a certain way and then you say something to like you go to college and you talk to the
Mhm.
people and they're like,
Mhm.
that's not
Not normal.
normal. It's like, oh, it's not like
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
and so really like gaining perspective
Hmm.
helps a lot
Hmm.
in whatever situation and whatever you're dealing with, but sometimes that's with a help of someone else
Sure.
and walking through that. And you have to dive into like really what's behind that. For me, like it wasn't those glasses, obviously.
Hmm.
It was the perception of people with glasses
Hmm.
that had been portrayed at that point in my life.
Yeah.
It's not so much anymore. I think it's
Right.
people were like, this is a cool like people
Yeah.
wear glasses
Yeah.
like when they don't
Get rid
have
of their
prescription.
contacts now just
Yeah.
to get glasses. Yeah.
So it's crazy how things change and
Hmm.
like the different, but we do. We have a big one is social media now.
Hmm. Hmm.
We see so many different people and so many different opinions, and that intake, like it's constant. Like you
Hmm.
said, like we're taking all this in, and you have different people's values and different people's opinions on themselves and on others. And so trying to cipher through that is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
And then even like the comparison piece too, like
Hmm.
you have, you see a picture of somebody's life and you're like, man, I wish I had a life like theirs.
Hmm.
But you're comparing your worst moments to their best.
Hmm.
And we have to remind ourselves like their life doesn't look like that all the time.
Mm-mm.
No matter who it is, their
Mhm,
life does not look like that all the time.
mhm, mhm,
So I think that goes to that outward. You think of, well, people perceive me this way because I don't have a life like them, or I don't have experiences like them, or I will never be like them. And I'm like, good. You're
mhm.
not supposed to be like them. You're supposed
Right.
to be yourself. And so that's been, I think, a an eye-opening thing just to be able to kind of bring that realization. And when I talk with people, like bring that realization to them, like,
Sure.
yeah, you're not supposed to be like other people. So how like let's walk through how people
Mm,
really do
mhm.
perceive you because that goes with that like creating that narrative. I think the inner critic and that creating narrative are like best
One
buds.
and the same. Yeah, they hold hands and skip around. Yeah.
Yeah, and they continue to put these thoughts and become
Sure.
reality.
Sure.
And it is a hard thing to dive through that and kind of slash that down.
Yeah.
go through the weeds, right?
Right.
To
And
find out what the truth is.
I think it's important that we say today that you and I are in the choir
Mhm.
talking here.
Yep.
We do not want to present as two people who do not have
Oh, yeah.
an inner critic or struggle with. There's a
Mhm.
reason why we're talking about this is
Yep.
because we have been talking about this, and we said we should probably talk about this,
Yes.
right? And include others,
Mhm.
and just so that someone listening can say, yeah, me too,
Mhm.
right? So let's just kind of dive into some
Yeah.
thoughts, if you would, right? So it has been said, the proverbial they, right,
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
have suggested that we have somewhere around 60,000 thoughts a day.
Mm.
So, anyway, who counted? And that somewhere from, I think, between 70 and 80% are negative.
Mm.
So that's what we're working out of right out of the gate.
Great start.
Um, and so when we think about that, and we start understanding inner critic, right? So criticism,
Mhm.
and something that we do inner. So there's like an inner dialogue that's happening.
Yeah.
It is inaudible for the
Mhm.
most part, right? We're talking about, and it sits kind of below surface level. So
Mm.
if you look at a boat, it's
Mhm.
everything below the water that you don't see,
Yep.
right? So let's start off with that. If we talk about inner critic and we're talking about self criticism, we're going to have a little lesson in language arts, which I despise. But anyway, who is the subject matter of the sentence?
Mhm.
Right? It's ourselves,
Yep.
correct? Interestingly enough, we have an enemy who is mhm, really
Mm.
cunning
Mhm.
at using distraction
Yeah.
and self absorption.
Mhm.
And so we become distracted through our self absorption.
Mm.
So we distract ourselves from being productive,
Yeah.
being effective, because we're just so self-absorbed with I can't, I
Yep.
should, I haven't, I won't, I'm too much this, I'm not enough
Mhm.
that. And interestingly enough, if someone else tries to tell you otherwise, right? So there's a reason why we ask somebody if we look fat in something.
Right.
It's because we believe we look fat in something,
Yep.
right? And so poor husbands, we ask them, "Hey, does this make me look fat?" Right?
Mm.
There's no win for them.
Nope.
Bless their hearts. If they say you do, they sleep on the couch. If they say you don't, you tell them they're lying to you
Uh-huh.
and they're making it up, or they're just saying that because they want to go out on the date. If anybody ever tries to tell us something opposite, right, of
Yeah.
what this inner critic is telling
Mhm.
us, we no longer trust their judgment. And we actually begin to use that as a more blanket belief about this other person. If I can't believe them about that, then I
Mhm.
can't believe anything they say, right? So I
Yeah.
begin to lack value in any other
Mhm.
thing that they say, which is really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
This is where how the snowball happens, and
Yeah.
anybody listening can, you can give your own amen. But so it begins to like start this overall negative view of like your life, your journey, your house, your marriage, your car, your
Mhm.
yard, your clothes, and your hair,
Yeah.
like that, right? We
Mhm.
can go from I didn't get all excellence on
Yep.
my job performance evaluation to my hair is horrible,
Yep.
right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
funny how we do. It's
Yeah.
very girl, but that's what we do, right?
Yeah.
So instead of looking through the lens of like what or how I could do better,
Mhm.
meaning like use this information as a way to make positive changes,
Yeah.
we tend to say I should have
Mhm.
known better. I should have
Right.
done better. What can you do about what you've done in the past?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Right.
Nothing. I can't take it back. It's
Yep.
done. But when I think in what I should have done, what I should have known, now it is critical.
Yeah.
I'm just
Right.
sitting there pointing my finger. It's like yelling at the dog who made a mess in the house. What do you want them to do about it? Like
Right.
you're just yelling at them like they can't take it back, you
It's
know?
very true.
And kind of like in my world, it's too late to shut the gate after the cows get out. Like
Yeah.
this is not the time to yell at yourself about what you should have done and should
Mhm.
have known. What I believe about myself is that I'm stupid, I'm
Mhm.
not smart, I'm lazy, I'm not creative, and I'm stuck,
Yeah.
right? So that's how deep and big
Mhm.
and wide this thing is.
Yeah.
It's more than just quote unquote feeling bad about yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some pretty deep stuff.
Yeah, it is, and I think of, like, I am a perfectionist, and, like, the survey that I took, a lot of people were perfectionist as well. I mean, that's how I was created, it's a part of me. It doesn't always have to be bad, but when you don't know how to look at it in a positive light,
Mm,
it gets real negative real quick. So it goes from like one little thing
Mhm.
like slipped up and it's not even affecting anyone else. It doesn't even matter. Like it's one of those things that you really could just brush off and everything would be okay. But in my life, that one little thing happened. And then so this means that this is horrible and and then I'm horrible and I'm a failure. And that's where it goes to. And so it's like, you could be like, oh, I didn't hold the door open for this old lady that was walking in and it shut on her. And now I'm a failure at life. Like that's
Absolutely.
where it
I must
goes.
not love Jesus.
I must
So
not.
now I'm a fake,
Yep.
and now I can't go to church because everybody's gonna know that, or God's gonna know that, right? Like,
Yeah. And you say that out loud and you're like, "That sounds
it's
ridiculous."
crazy.
But in that moment, your mind's like, "Absolutely, that is 100% true. You need to figure out how to make that
Absolutely.
better."
It's a super short flight from
Mhm.
A to B, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, there's so many examples I think you could go through even in my own personal life of things that I've thought or went through, but it's one of those things that you do have to recognize and we've, you know, you talk about like constructive criticism that
Mm,
other people will give you and that's beneficial. That's really helpful. So if we could take that inner critic and make it constructive inner critic, I don't know if that's going to be a term, but it
mhm,
is right now, but
mhm,
that if we could make it more constructive where we're like, okay, this did happen. Yeah, this is true. But like, it's not as bad as my mind wants to go to. But how can I learn from it? So, those past mistakes, those things that you went through, how can I learn from those moments? What can I learn and change? And if it did make me feel kind of crappy, okay, what do I do next time if this
yes,
comes up? Not a, your life is, you might as well just go in a corner and be in the fetal position because your life is over
right,
now.
right.
It's kind of like little thing, but like when you go through the drive-through, we've talked about this,
Mhm.
and they're like, "Enjoy your drink," and you're like, "You
You
too,"
too.
and you drive off, and you're like, "I can never go back to Starbucks. Can't go back to that one. I'm done."
No, if someone told me Happy Mother's Day, it was a dude, and I said, "You too," like,
Yep.
and I just ended up laughing about it, but I think too that if we look at the words that we're using, we use
Mhm.
inner critic, and it's what we're saying, not really is it them having, like, constructive criticism
Mhm.
where we're in evaluation,
Right.
right? This is actually an inner bully.
Mhm.
Right? So I think it makes more sense to us when we say inner bully,
Yeah.
because this person isn't trying to help us evaluate
Nope.
how we could do better. No.
Yeah.
Again, real short flight. But
Mhm.
I wrote down a few phrases that I've just heard over the years,
Okay.
right? So I'll just share a few of them. We'll
Yeah.
just kind of go through the list. Some of these are how someone talks to themselves. What makes you think you can do this
Mm.
when no one values your opinion? What makes you think you know what you're talking about? You're not as fill in the blank
Yep.
as fill in the blank,
Mhm.
so you can't do that. You're fat. No one cares what you have to say. Isn't
Mhm.
that interesting? I'm
Mm.
so far behind, there's no need to try. I'm a failure.
Yep.
I'm screwing up everyone around me. I'm stupid, lazy, and a bad mom. Your husband doesn't really love you. He's just stuck to stay in the marriage right now because of the kids. I'm not enough.
Mm.
And this list could
Yeah.
just go on and on and on. But
Mhm.
that's the language that we're talking about. That's the
Yeah.
verbiage that we're hearing in our heads, and we believe that about
Yeah.
ourselves. And if this is how you think about yourself, you can't unstuck yourself,
Yeah.
basically, right? So if this kind of thinking keeps you oppressed,
Mhm.
someone who is oppressed does not like reach around and pick themselves up by the belt loop and pull themselves
Yeah.
out. This stuff right here keeps you stuck. It keeps you going around and around in a circle.
Yeah. That vicious circle that
Yes.
never ends
Right.
until you can maybe break a little hole through it. And for me, that was going to counseling.
Mm,
That was talking through the way I saw myself when I was younger, or the thoughts that I believed were absolute truth, and they weren't. Like, I had to come to a really hard realization that some of those things that I believed were not true at all.
mhm,
And I think part of the reason I was able to get there, one, with the help of loving people around me, but also because I had two girls, two young girls that I grew up with body images, and not because of my parents were great. It's not my parents, but the world around us.
mhm,
Growing up in the early or the late 90s, early 2000s was not a great time for a female when everybody wanted to be like thin, and that was not me. Realizing that I didn't want my girls
mm,
to have the same thoughts I did was the time that I was like, something has to change.
mm,
Like, if they see me looking in the mirror and talking about myself in a certain way,
mm,
then that's what they're going to mimic. That's what they're going to start doing because that's what they know. And so that was a big turning point, and that's why I was so invested into making that change. And again, like it's not something that is just gone and I'm like, "Great, I never have to deal with that again." No, I still deal with that on a daily
Yes.
basis.
Yes.
And there's a lot of other factors that can play into that that will be in other podcasts. So you definitely need to listen. In other
Stay
episodes.
tuned.
Stay tuned. Very soon, coming to a place near you into your earbuds. But no, there's so many things that played into it that I really had to find out. Really working through that and now being able to see my girls where they're at. And I have one that's getting ready to go in junior high, but she is the most confident young preteen
Mhm.
that is out there. And she's like, "Mom, I love myself." And I'm like, "I am so glad you do." I'm like, bless, like, I'm like, "Yes, thank you." Cause like, that's why I work so hard to
Sure.
work for myself is so that they didn't have to have that same struggle.
Mhm.
And I think that that was a turning point. And if you have to find something like that to pull you out of it, that's a really good push.
Mhm.
But you need to make sure you're doing it for yourself too.
I think though that helps us have a new lens that we
Hmm.
didn't have to begin with, right?
Yeah.
When we see how we're talking about ourselves, the question always is, and
Hmm.
I think I might roll my eyes, but I shouldn't. Anyway, I guess because it's been around so long, but like, would you talk to your best friend that way?
Right.
Right? Like,
Yep.
I know we've all heard that one. That's supposed to be some kind of intervention. But
Hmm.
when you think about it, do you want your kid, do you want
Yeah.
your daughter talking to herself the way you talk to you?
Yep.
Let that be a lens that
Hmm.
you put on, and it does help us give
Yeah.
us some fresh sight
Yeah.
to what's going on, right? Just kind of
Yep.
brings it up to the surface. And I think a lot of times that this bully really starts to show up is when we're trying to do something bigger than what we've already done,
Hmm.
right? And it tells us that we're being irrational,
Yep.
that like why or what we can't be stepping out of this box that
Hmm.
we've been in. All right, this is very scary. And so keeping that in mind as well is that, you might hear her very loudly
Hmm.
when it's time to move up into some kind of a promotion, or
Right.
maybe there's just a ministry that God's laid on your heart that you
Hmm.
feel very strongly about. And all of a sudden, boom, she starts talking really
Yeah.
loud because you're right. She doesn't go away. She will
Hmm.
never go away,
Yep.
but we can learn to manage her
Yeah.
though.
And to speak truth, like there's, the verse that talks about look at, think upon whatever's true, whatever's noble,
Philippians 4:8.
and
Yeah.
think upon those things. And I think if we can put that inner bully, I love that
Mhm.
term
Mhm.
because that's what I want to change it to from now
Mhm.
on when I
Mhm.
talk to anyone
Mhm.
is if we can filter it through that verse
Yeah.
is like, okay, is this actually true?
Yep.
And if it is, then let's figure
Do
out
something
what
about
to
it. Yeah.
do. But if it's not, then let's not let that become a truth within us. And I think that that is a great just small tool that you can put and easily into your own daily life. And it talks about hiding the scripture in your heart. Like I didn't say the whole verse, but most of you, if you've read that verse, you knew what it was. And
Mhm.
so having at least just part of it and being able to go back, and if it's writing it on sticky notes and putting it everywhere,
Yeah.
do it,
Yeah.
because that will help start changing your habit of wanting to like follow this inner bully all the time.
Let's dive into something that we've talked about,
Yeah.
both of us having grown up in the church,
Hmm.
right? That being a good Christian equaled doormat.
Oh yeah.
Let's go there, right? And so we were taught not to think,
Mhm.
not to be prideful, and not
Yep.
to think highly of ourselves. So nobody really taught us what that meant,
Yep.
other than the easiest way not to do that
Mhm.
is to think really poorly of yourself,
Yep.
right? To really dog on yourself, really put yourself down.
Mhm.
I think it's the reason why, and listen, you're going to catch this now every time you say it or someone else does it.
Mhm.
But somebody says, "Hey, I like that shirt." What do? We say where we got it
Yep.
and the price,
I got it
right?
in clearance.
Right?
Or
Like
it has pockets.
clearance,
Every
$2,
time.
right?
Yep.
Every single time.
Yes.
Instead of just saying thank you,
Yep.
we have to make sure that we're not being
Mhm.
prideful. We have to swing way over
Yeah.
here and somehow bring ourselves down. We have to
Mhm.
downplay something, right? And
Yeah.
somebody says, good job singing. You're like, oh,
Right.
well, I feel like I could have done better. Oh, well, I
Yeah.
messed up on that part. Or
Mhm.
thank you,
Yeah.
right? But we can't. And
Yeah.
And I do believe that that is because, we were taught not to be prideful, and
Mhm.
we do need to be careful about
Yeah,
being prideful,
absolutely.
but we also need to think about what being prideful
Yeah.
is. And also, let's think about the scripture in Romans where the Apostle Paul tells us not to think too highly of yourself, but to have sober judgment. And
Mm.
that means an honest
Yeah.
evaluation. That does not mean
Mhm.
I dog myself, it
Right.
means I have an honest eval,
Yeah.
like constructive criticism. It's an
Yeah.
evaluation. It is not meant that I have to put myself down to put myself in place,
Yeah.
to not think too highly of myself,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
I think that that's huge
Mhm.
for us, those of us who grew up in the church, or
Yeah.
from whatever reason, we really been taught that about
Mhm.
not being prideful. We have to be careful not to swing the other way as well, right?
Yeah.
Which keeps us so inner focused on ourselves. Then who are you thinking about constantly?
We think about ourselves way more than
All
anybody else
the
does.
time. And
Yeah.
aren't we supposed to, Philippians 4:8,
Mhm.
aren't we supposed to think of what is good and pure and of good
Mhm.
report? Aren't we supposed to have be Christ centered, where we're thinking about Christ, thinking
Yeah.
about becoming more like Christ? Now, how are you gonna become like Christ? Right? If you're always worried about what you're
Mhm.
not, what you can't, and what you've done
Yep.
wrong.
Mhm.
We cannot, that's double-minded. Can't do both at the same time.
Yeah.
We got to pick one. Either
Mhm.
you're going to think about Christ, and in Zephaniah, I'm really going to butcher this, so somebody please don't hold it against me. But in Zephaniah, it talks about the Lord, like singing over us,
Mm.
and being glad
Yeah.
over us,
Mhm.
like loves us.
Right.
He thinks we're cool, right?
Mhm.
He thinks we're such a big deal
Yeah.
and wants to spend forever with
Mhm.
us, so much that he's going to let his son down a cross for us.
Right.
So, really important, this sober judgment piece,
Mm.
really want to drive that home, is
Yeah.
if you think you're being uber biblical
Mhm.
by being this, I'm a doormat, I'm nothing, I'm a worm,
Yeah.
be careful
Yeah.
that we're swinging too far.
I resonate with that so much. And this is crazy because, of course, we're talking about this today and yesterday. I sat down with somebody who I've only met through digital spaces on ministry, and we've worked together and did some things. And she was telling me about the things she's doing with, she does grief companionship. So, with that, and with chaplaincy with the Y. And so it was awesome. And then she was asking me questions. And I literally was sitting there explaining all this stuff and like talking about what we're doing here at the church and everything. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, man, you're really bragging on yourself. Like,
Mm,
even though it wasn't all about me, it was about what the church is doing, what our ministries are doing, like, and how like I'm passionate about it, excited about it. So it comes out, and we're sitting there, and I thought that, and then it came out verbally that I was
mm.
like, I feel like I'm bragging about myself. And she was like, no, like, this is awesome. I want to hear what you're
I
doing."
ask you a question and you're
Yeah.
giving me an answer.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, and I thought through that, and then I'm like, well, first off, okay, no, not bragging. And then I'm like, so I had to stop myself and realize, no, I'm not. And then I like came to that conclusion that I was like, man, I am in a like really good spot. I love what I'm doing. Like this
Mhm,
podcast, I love to get to do
mhm,
that. And I told her,
mhm,
I was like, I want you on it sometime.
mhm,
And so it was amazing to be able to see, like, even just in my own life, the growth of where I used to be and then to where I'm in now, even though I had that moment, but I could come back and have that realization like last night as I was like processing through obviously our conversations
mhm,
and all everything, and just thinking how cool it was to meet in person and all of that. And then be like, man, I'm like, I am proud of myself of what
mhm,
I've done, but
mhm,
like in a healthy way,
mhm,
in a good
mhm,
way, and then seeing like God work through things and
mhm.
how it's not been me putting myself in these places. And so it was a really good reminder for myself just to
Sure.
be like, yeah, I am like I'm happy with what I'm doing. I'm proud of this. Like it's exciting and getting to, talk and share through the wonders of online platforms through even this podcast, and hopefully being able to share with people things that they're going through,
Mhm.
is an incredible thing. And just whoever is listening right now and has listened through all this or listened to other episodes, like I'm so grateful that
Yes.
I have this platform to be able to say, yeah, I've dealt with this stuff, or
Yep.
like I've dealt with this inner critic, inner bully, I've dealt with anxiety, I've like all these different topics we were talking about. And that so someone on the other side can be like, yeah, Me too. Like
Sure.
I've struggled with this, but like I've never told anyone,
Yep.
or just to not feel alone
Yes.
is
Yes.
so important. And I
Yes.
think when we start to realize that like with this, everyone deals with it.
Yep.
We're not the only person, because I think that's what her inner bully will tell us. We're the only person that thinks this way. But everyone is thinking it about you. And I'm like, oh, that no,
Well,
that's
which
not true.
brings us right to confirmation bias, right? That if we think something, then we look around
Yeah.
and get confirmation in our environment. And if we think, for instance, my husband thinks that I'm boring,
Mhm.
and I say, "Hey, do you want to go out to the movies?" And he says, "No, I don't really feel like it."
Yep.
See, I told you. I knew it. I know. I knew it. I knew he thinks I'm
Mhm.
boring, right? So, and we do that a
Yep.
lot, where we want to find proof
Yeah.
that this inner bully is right, and all of that, so very important, that like you said, that when we're speaking this, and I feel like maybe this one might be going a little bit longer than our usual conversations, but
Kind of important though.
I think it is
Yeah.
super important, and I think there are so many different intricacies
Mhm.
inside it, that
Yeah.
that's why I feel like it's important that we hit on these, because I think there's going to be one that one person's going to be
Yep.
like, yeah, yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
So bringing up all of these pieces, and one of these that I definitely want us to sit on is, what are we going to do,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
we've talked a while about the problem.
Mhm.
Let's start talking about solution.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
one of those is something that we've said before.
Mhm.
I will say it until I am blue in the face, and that is, the Apostle Paul tells us to take every thought captive.
Mhm.
Right, so we go back to Second Corinthians, and that means start paying attention to what you're thinking.
Yep.
And that is a skill that gets better the more
Mhm.
it's used, right? It's a muscle. Again, realize that this bully is not going to go away. So we have to learn to manage her.
Mhm.
Know the difference between her voice,
Mhm.
your voice, and God's voice.
Yeah.
Okay. And question is how do you know God's voice? Well, first you need to go read what he's already said.
Yep.
And that's primary. We need to be able to hear something and be like, "Oh, wait,
Mhm.
that sounds like it goes against what the Bible says," right? Get curious. Now,
Mm.
you and I have talked about this before, and I remember you was like, "Well, that's interesting concept." Is, let's get curious about her. Let's see her as she is operating, the bully, by the way.
Mhm.
The bully is operating outside of her hurt.
Mm.
So what she's trying to do is actually protect us,
Mhm.
right? Don't do that, you're going to
Yeah.
get hurt. Don't do that, you're going to be embarrassed. Don't do that, people are
Right.
going to make fun of you,
Mhm.
right? Don't do that, you're going to mess up. You're not going to be able to
Yeah.
do it, and it's going to be really bad.
Mhm.
So learn my unrealistic expectations,
Mm.
because that's where she gets some material.
Yeah.
Learn what worked for us to get attention, praise, and a sense of achievement
Mm.
as a kiddo, because
Mm.
that's also where she gets her
Mhm.
material. Go research and look for evidence. Stop assuming, 'cause that is also where she gets her
Uh-huh.
material. And if we look at her as an injured 6-year-old,
Mhm.
okay? Would you take advice from a 6-year-old about your future planning? No.
No.
Would you take advice from a 13-year-old about your marriage?
Oh, no.
No, no, no. Would
No.
you take advice from an 18-year-old about your finances?
No.
Okay, then why are you listening to her?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's who that is.
Mhm.
That's an injured 6-year-old telling you what you need to do
Yep.
about your career path.
Mhm.
That injured 6-year-old is telling you how you need to manage your marriage. Literally,
Yeah.
that's what's happening. And she's trying to protect you. She's trying to be like, "No, no, 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 no,
Right.
don't do that," right?
Yeah.
Um, so if we get curious and we listen to her
Mhm.
through that lens, I do think it changes,
Yeah.
right? I think it
Mhm.
changes how we hear her.
Yeah.
And then also, I'm going to use the enemy's trick against him, and that is to ask myself, did God really say?
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what he hit with Eve, but like, I don't know, did God really say that you are worthless?
Mhm.
Did he really say that you're stupid? Did he say you're ugly?
Mhm.
Right? Like, did he say because you're having a bad hair day, you can't get that promotion?
Uh-huh.
Because that's literally what we think.
Yeah. Answer that question with a question.
Absolutely. Is, did God really say? And when we know that God says, and I love this is in Isaiah. I'm going to read it. Isaiah 43:1. Do not fear. I have redeemed you. I have summoned you. You are mine. Of course, he's talking to the nation of Israel, but
Mhm.
this is the equivalent of you saying, because we both have daughters,
Yep.
that's my girl.
Mhm.
Now, when you say that, you feel it, don't you?
Yeah.
Felt something right there,
Mhm.
right? And that says, when we say that phrase, it says, I accept her. I'm proud of her.
Mhm.
She's connected to me. She's a part
Yeah.
of me. I receive her. I'm soft toward her. I see myself in her. And I like that.
Mhm.
And I want that to be public. God just said, that girl's mine. That's my girl.
Mhm.
That's my boy.
Yeah.
He's saying, I accept her. I'm proud of her. She's connected to me. I'm a part of her and she's a part of me. I receive her. I'm soft toward her. That's what the Bible says. That's what God says
Yeah.
about us. And you've often shared the question that Donnie
Mhm.
asked you,
Yep.
and we both talked about it.
Yeah.
And what was that?
It was how do I see myself was
Hmm.
the first one, and then it was how does my husband see
Hmm.
me, and then how does God see me?
Yep.
And that was the one that started to shift.
Yes.
Um, because I knew those answers. I knew what to say. But
Hmm.
did I believe it?
Did I believe him?
No,
Mm-mm.
because I believed that inner bully.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And how hard it is, probably even when I was saying those things, right? It's hard to go in.
Yep.
Does it anybody else feel like that there's just like this brick wall that it
Uh-huh.
bounces off of?
Yeah.
Because I think, all right, so let's go back to VBS. Again, we both grew up in church.
Yep.
We start singing, He's got the whole world in his
Mhm.
hands. We're cool with the first line. Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He
Got the
loves the world.
he's got it
God,
in.
he
Yep.
for so loved it that he gave his only son,
Mhm.
right? God loves him. Then we go to the second verse.
Mhm.
He's got you and me. Okay, now it just got personal.
Mhm.
And I can sing that verse. Do I believe it?
Mhm.
It hits a wall, does it not?
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that is honestly where we need to go, girl. Like, I
Mhm.
really do think that if we were to say step one,
Yeah.
that's where we need to go. That's step one is asking my question, what do I believe
Yeah.
God sees when he sees me? What do I believe he thinks when he thinks of
Mhm.
me? Start there.
Mhm.
And then I think we go from there, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy. I'm
No.
not promoting this as something that's just real simple, easy, one, two, three
Yep.
step. But I do think that is a baseline
Mhm.
step that we have to go to.
Yeah, I mean, even when I walked through that, like I said, I wrote those things down that I knew
Mhm.
and but I didn't believe them. And it
Mm-mm.
wasn't until weeks and maybe even a month later that that started to sink in and I started to really be able to see that. And now I can see so much more. And I think after that step gets a little bit easier because that's huge.
Yes.
When you can see yourself from someone else's perspective, we think we do, right? It's the we think this
We
person thinks
assume.
we assume this person thinks this about me, but when you know true hard and fast how that person feels, like how my husband feels, how God feels about me, and it changes things
Mm,
and it starts to change that inside of you on, okay, this is now how I view myself, that I view myself in this light.
yeah.
And I love that you brought up that verse in Isaiah because that's one we actually have on our wall for our
Mm,
girls too. And we have a little bit of a different version that says, for I have redeemed you, I
yeah.
have called you by name. When you have somebody call you by name, that changes things because your name is important
Yep.
to you.
Yeah.
And we think about it a lot and we think about ourselves. But when you have someone else, or like you have someone that remembers your name, you know how that feels.
Mhm.
Even if you just met them once and they say your name and you're like, oh, wow.
Mhm.
And so, what bigger and better and more incredible is it that our God calls us by name,
Yeah.
that says your name and wants to have a relationship with you personally? It's an incredible thing when you can really let that sink in.
Mm,
Because again, we
sure.
do let it hit that wall, because we've had years and years and years
Yes.
of building that wall.
Right.
It didn't happen overnight.
And start writing down the
Hmm.
sentences that are on that wall.
Yep.
Pay attention
Mhm.
to the sentences
Yeah.
because those are the things that are keeping you from
Mhm.
absolutely receiving and
Yeah.
fully accepting that God says, I redeem you, I accept you, you are
Yeah.
mine, right? There is a ton of yeah buts,
Mhm.
right? Or I believe this, right? Start pen to paper,
Yeah.
sit down, write Isaiah 43 1 at the top of your page.
Mhm.
and then just start paying attention to all the sentences that are written on that wall
Yeah.
that's not allowing that to go in. I think is just really great first step.
Well, when you start to write those things down or say them out loud to a safe person,
Mm,
you're able to start letting that not control you.
yeah.
It loses its power.
Yes, it does.
When it stays in our minds,
Hmm.
it
It
has
grows.
all the power.
It grows.
Grows,
Yeah.
it has complete control over you. But when you can start to get those out, and you may not realize it at first, but you, after time, you will start to see that
Pulling weeds.
difference.
Absolutely. It's just
Absolutely.
like pulling weeds.
Yeah, no, I think that is a great place to stop.
Yes.
I mean, I think we could go
For
and on
hours.
for so long, but you guys probably don't wanna sit here and listen. Yeah, it's a little bit longer, but I think this was so important to
Mhm.
talk about, and it's something, like we said at the beginning, everybody deals with this. It doesn't matter if you're male or female, young or
Yep.
old. At some point in your life, you've dealt with this, or maybe you're dealing with it right now. And so I think that this kind of technique and walking through with this verse is gonna be so important if that's something you want to do. But also find that safe person, whether it's a professional counselor or a pastor that you know that you can trust. Find that safe person to be able to talk through these things, and someone who really will listen to you. If you don't have that, I say this, I think, every episode, but I'm willing to chat with you, and if I need to help find you somebody, we can
Mhm.
do that.
Mhm.
And so my email will be in the show notes. So just email me, and I would love to be able to chat with you if you don't have that safe person, and maybe we can find that. But yeah, I think this was a great topic.
Yeah.
I feel like the time flew by.
Mhm.
It went so fast, and hopefully you listening, it went fast as well. Just that something sparked in you, and
Sure.
that you can recognize and maybe take a step toward your healing journey. So
Mhm.
thank you, Joni, for being with me. And I know
Absolutely.
you'll
This
be
is
back
great.
soon for other episodes to come. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Real Talk with Megan. Remember, you are not alone. Seeking help is a sign of strength, and taking care of your mental health is just as important as taking care of your physical health. We'll see you next time for more honest conversations.